Local programming on KRWG Public Media made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
This is KRWG Public Media, TV, radio, online. News that matters. Now, across the Mesilla Valley and the borderland, the stories that shape our community. From the KRWG Broadcast Center at New Mexico State University, this is Newsmakers.
Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Raess. On today's episode, we are taking a look at affordable housing concerns in our region. Recently, questions have been raised about the eviction process and the number of evictions in affordable housing properties owned by the Mesilla Valley Public Housing Authority. I have more in this report. Affordable housing has been a highly discussed topic in Las Cruces for some time, but questions have been raised from local lawyers and nonprofits about the number of people being taken to court for evictions. Since August of 2021, at least 115 people have been taken to court, but people like Winter Torres, the founder of the New Mexico Eviction Prevention and Diversion Program, says that there are ways that evictions could be limited.
When we're working with folks who are vulnerable or in need, it takes real human beings to do outreach and play sort of, a mid-role between the landlords and the tenants. And those can be highly successful, but they kind of don't get funded very often.
Once these evictions take place, the former tenants face a new set of issues. Waitlists for assistance through the Housing Authority are anywhere between 2 and 6 years long, but now they also have to serve a probationary period before they can get back in line.
Any sort of subsidized housing, if you get evicted, you will lose your voucher. So then you are barred for at least a certain amount of time from being able to get another voucher. So you can't even get in line again. And so it really puts our most vulnerable folks at risk for homelessness.
People who get taken to court for evictions end up at the Doña Ana County Magistrate Court. However, according to one attorney we talked with, these eviction hearings may not even have an attorney present.
When you look at these cases, regardless of whether it's a property manager who is through the housing authority or whether it's a property manager that's through a private company, none of them are attorneys.
Emma Stahl is a lawyer who has dealt with evictions extensively through her career. She says that legal issues like these are hard to comprehend even with legal training.
It's hard for even attorneys to look at federal regulations and then advisory opinions that come out and say, this is exactly how this should be applied, right? So how are non-attorneys supposed to understand all of these federal regulations and advisory opinions and statutes and say, this is exactly how this is supposed to play out? So I do think that there's a fundamental issue in terms of training.
Stahl says that this lack of training has real effects for tenants facing issues. Things like reasons for evictions, right to request documents, and rights to grievance procedures are supposed to be in the eviction notices from the public housing programs, but are sometimes missing.
So with this case in particular that I pulled, one of the things that I immediately noticed was the tenant received a document informing her that she was behind on her rent. She had to pay it within 14 days, and if she didn't, she needed to leave. And the item omits, the notice omits several items within the lease, even that they require themselves to inform the tenant of.
The procedural issues do not end there. The managers of the public housing property are also required to inform tenants that they are being charged with a late fee no later than the beginning of the next month. According to Stahl, this does not always happen and can cause tenants to owe hundreds of dollars without notice.
I have looked through this tenant's, the documents filed with the petition that they filed against her, and repeatedly in the ledger, there are late fees for over a year, and there are no late fee notices included for any of those late fees.
Stahl also says that the CARES Act, passed in 2020, requires landlords of subsidized properties to give tenants a 30-day notice of non-payment of rent, something that sometimes does not happen.
I have not seen Mesilla Valley Public Housing Authority provide tenants with that 30-day notice. They're providing a three-day notice saying, hey, you're behind on rent. If you don't pay it, we're going to give you a 14-day notice. And then they give tenants a 14-day notice. So I would argue in court that there are like severe notice deficiencies, and this is something that we repeatedly see.
The Mesilla Valley Public Housing Authority just underwent a leadership change, with former Executive Director Juan Oliveira retiring after 20 years. Currently, Interim Executive Director Elizabeth Garcia has taken his place. She says that they have been issuing the notices.
We must comply with federal, state, and local laws, especially on the tenant. The termination process starts when the tenant fails to comply with the lease agreement, okay? And once they fail, we start issuing notices, telling them, this is a non-compliance, and we start giving like a 3-day notice and then 30-day notice. If they don't pay attention to those notices, they don't come forward, they don't come and talk to their specialist, then we go to the court, and the court will issue, if we win the case, an eviction notice.
For many of their properties, like Desert Hope Apartments, where, according to court documents, a woman was taken to court for not paying $183 in rent, the housing authority hires private property managers.
We don't have anything to do with their eviction process. It's like private landlords. We don't tell them what to do. They have to follow, though, the state and local laws.
While evictions can be more common in housing authorities than private housing providers, Attorney Winter Torres says that not all evictions are unnecessary, but improvement still needs to be made.
And sometimes, sometimes evictions are completely justified. But we would prefer definitely to get in there and see what's going on. And at a minimum, maybe if they're going to have to be evicted, secure a shelter bed or figure out what we're going to do with this family.
According to the Mesilla Valley Public Housing Authority's website, it helps house over 6,000 people. And as demand for affordable housing increases, more people will be needing assistance. Joining us now to talk about affordable housing is Democratic State Representative Angelica Rubio. Thank you for being here today.
You're welcome. I'm happy to be here.
Just to start off, I was looking through some of the housing bills that went through the legislature this last session, and I noticed it was kind of a record-breaking year for housing bills, with nearly 200 being introduced. One that caught my eye was a bill that you actually introduced, and it covered the sealing of eviction records. Can you go over what that bill would have done if it would have passed?
Yeah, thanks, Noah. That bill was really important for us. So just for context, over the course of last year, many of us were working on a number of bills related to housing, and this was one of those bills that we felt was critical to address a lot of our housing crisis. And what it would have done, if it would have passed committee, was it would have allowed for certain types of evictions that have happened in the past for certain home renters to have been sealed after a period of time. One of the things that we see a lot is that there's renters who may have had one occurrence or situation that was maybe not a great situation, but they've really been able to fix things up, I guess, in their situation. And so it's hard for them to be able to attain housing later on. And so that was the purpose, is to support and try to help tenants who may have had issues in the past to try to get housing now in the present.
And I also heard you were part of a sort of housing coalition that was going on. What was the housing coalition, and what were some other bills that were presented?
So the coalition, we have a really amazing housing ecosystem within New Mexico that's a lot of nonprofits who are a part of that work, who really supported a lot of us legislators. I think there was like 8 or 9 of us who worked all throughout the summer and fall last year to just come up with a platform for this coming year. And so we had a lot of bills that were introduced. One, of course, was addressing and reforming the Human Rights Act to address income source, to add income source to that. And that was one of the bills that I carried that also unfortunately did not make it through.
And as I mentioned before, there was a lot of housing bills that got entered. Is this something that the legislative branch is going to look into more in the future?
I would hope so. I think one of the things that was a real breakthrough with the pandemic was that we made housing more of a priority within the legislature. I feel that a lot of us who have been serving and who have been recently elected have really seen the housing crisis as a priority. And so I really hope, at least as long as I'm serving, that housing is a priority because it is a really important issue for New Mexicans.
And another bill that I saw that you introduced talked about AI rent control or rent prices. Is that an issue that we're seeing here in Las Cruces, and why is that an issue?
It's not necessarily yet an issue, at least as big as in other places around the country, but it's not anything, I'm not opposed to AI. I think that in terms of how it's being used here in this issue around housing, it takes away from sort of like that free market that landlords have opportunities to figure out where the housing is, what kind of neighborhood they live in, them being able to set a rate of rent. And I think with the way that AI is being used for housing, it's not proportionate to what's actually the reality within our communities. And so Las Cruces, I think we already have increasing rents, and with AI sort of manipulating that, I think what we have found is that it really could increase rents without actually having landlords really be thoughtful about what that rent should look like.
And was that a bill to get ahead of the curve, or was that kind of something that was...
I mean, AI is moving really, really fast, as we all know, across the country and around the world. And so I think we have just been really thoughtful about how do we address it. I know there were other AI-related bills in the legislature this year that didn't get through, but this one was specifically directed to housing to ensure that this wasn't another tool that landlords were using to increase rents, that we wanted to ensure that they were still doing it the traditional way of just understanding the neighborhoods in which a lot of these houses and rental spaces exist.
And one bill that did pass involved eliminating what are called junk fees from what tenants have to pay. What are junk fees, and kind of what does this bill do to get rid of them?
The bill was really important because when folks are applying for any type of rental space, tenants specifically, there's always add-ons. And so there's quite a bit of detail around what those junk fees are. And so what this bill tried to do and will do hopefully is to eliminate that so that the tenant is only taking care of rent and maybe deposits on the front end and not having to deal with other fees that might be applied later on.
And in my reporting, I guess my reporting career so far, I've kind of come to appreciate how hard it is to pass a bill. It's very difficult to even get it heard by committee or getting it passed, just one chamber. Are there any unique challenges to passing a housing bill?
I think so. I really love how our legislature has changed over the course of the decade that I've been in the legislature. It looks and feels a lot different than when I first joined in 2017. And I think that is one of the biggest positives of it. We have been able to pass really amazing and transformational policy. But there are still sort of like this old guard of legislators who make it really difficult to pass some of these housing bills. And I think a lot of it has to do with the conflicts of interest that exist within our legislature. We're still an unpaid legislature, very much volunteer, and we have landlords who serve in the legislature to earn extra income. And so I think that conflict of interest makes it impossible a lot of times to be able to be pass legislation that's more pro-tenant, because of sort of that conflict of interest that exists within our legislature.
And were there any locations where housing bills tended to die more often, or where you kind of noticed a lot of hiccups?
Yes, and we would need another hour to talk about this, but there are a lot of hiccups. I think in the House, at least in my opinion, I feel like we go in with sort of this platform of what we want to pass collectively, and this I give kudos to our leadership on that. On the Senate, it's a little much more challenging because a lot of our bills get stuck in certain committees, particularly when it comes to Senate Finance and Senate Judiciary. These are the two committees where a lot of our bills essentially go to die, and it's unfortunate. But I am hopeful that over the course of the next couple years, we can continue to push these issues forward, because they're issues that matter and issues that really a lot of New Mexicans want to see follow through.
And what are some statewide efforts to increase affordable housing? Are there any programs or efforts underway right now?
At the moment, yes. I know over the course of the legislative session, we did make some changes to property taxes for veterans, for example, where veterans will, I can't remember the specifics, but we made some changes so that the taxes will be, it won't be so high for veterans, and in some cases may not have to pay certain property taxes. Another is through our appropriations, we were able to just provide more housing amount allocations to housing issues. I think those were really important investments, especially what we're experiencing at the federal level, where we will see a really our housing crisis potentially perpetuate itself because of just what's coming down at the federal level. And so I don't see us actually stopping this allocation of funding. I know we may have to go back later in the year to address some of this stuff, and then again next year for the 30-day session.
And affordable housing is a very complex topic, complex issue, and complex thing to provide. What do you think are the biggest barriers to people seeking affordable housing?
I mean, I think a lot of the issue is that there just isn't a lot of housing available right now, and that is an issue that we need to address, and we've been slowly doing that, I know, in a lot of municipal and local jurisdictions. But that is one of the issues. I think another issue is just the way how we see housing. For me, I look at housing through this sort of intersection between that and transportation and access to infrastructure that addresses just having tenants and people who own homes having access to services. That I think there's just so much sprawl that we need to really bring it in and invest in traditional neighborhoods.
That brings me to my next point, which is Realize Las Cruces is this new initiative to increase kind of urban density and change some of the city's zoning laws. How do you think this will affect housing and transportation, like you were saying?
You know, I'm really excited about it. I was in session when the city passed it, and it's been a process over the course of the last 3 years that I think centering as a community organizer, to be able to center communities and the community getting to decide how we want to really transform our city so that it is more centered on opportunities for people who are living here, I think is exciting. And I'm really looking forward to working with local leaders to figure out how I can be supportive, especially from the transportation aspect, where I'm a bike commuter. I want more people to be able to have access to our streets outside of a car. And so to be able to imagine something different for our city, I think Realize Las Cruces is one of those tools to really get us there.
And one thing that's come up in some of our reporting at KRWG is people are concerned about the housing density, and they're concerned that putting an apartment complex maybe in like a kind of suburban area might bring down housing values or property values. What are kind of your responses to those concerns and people worried about urban density a little bit?
I mean, I think historically it's always been a concern that property owners have, and I like to push back on that, because I think that our communities deserve to have opportunities to live in safe spaces and to have a diversity of people living in a community. I think actually enhances Las Cruces versus what I think people think might happen, which we've seen hasn't happened over the course of decades of having this type of tool available to us. And so I think it enriches the community. And so I like to push back and say, like, that's just a lot of fear mongering, and it's fine. But I think it's just such a small minority of people, because I think Las Cruces has spoken loud and clear that this is an issue that's really important to them.
And are there any other cities in New Mexico, or is there any state efforts, maybe some other bills that were passed in the legislature that would kind of help ideas like Realize Las Cruces spread throughout New Mexico?
Yeah, we had legislation, actually. I believe it was Representative Barrajon from, she represents the city of Albuquerque, introduced legislation this past year that would have made sort of a statewide type of Realize Las Cruces, but at a bigger scale. So to ensure that it's not just places who have home rule, but that it's actually a statewide effort for communities to be thinking about how do we bring in community ideas into the type of zoning that we want to create for our communities.
Angelica Rubio is the state representative for District 35. Thank you so much for being here today.
Of course, thank you.
One recent move to redefine housing in Las Cruces is the Realize Las Cruces zoning and building ordinances. The move, approved by City Council this year, aims to increase housing density and give builders more flexibility. KRWG reporter Johnny Coker has more.
Earlier this year, the Las Cruces City Council approved a series of zoning and building ordinances, known as Realize Las Cruces, that overhauls the city's development code, marking a significant change for the city, as the last significant update to the land use code occurred in 2001. George Pearson is the vice president of Velo Cruces, a local bicycle and pedestrian advocacy organization. Pearson was part of the city's technical advisory committee during public discussion of changing the city's code. Along with engineers, business owners, developers, and other stakeholders, Pearson went through the new code line by line and offered suggestions.
It offers more flexibility than what the current code offers. So if you wanted to add a little casita in the back of your property, you would have more ability to do that rather than a flat-out no from the current zoning code.
And that's a word you'll often hear with folks in favor of the new code: flexibility. Among other provisions, the new zoning code aims to increase housing density and create more options for developers within Las Cruces' neighborhoods. As a cycling advocate, Pearson said he appreciates having the option to live in a denser neighborhood as opposed to strictly single-family zoning.
It's good to offer a choice where people can live in other places where they can choose to ride to work on a bicycle or even walk to work, and maybe have a neighborhood coffee shop where they can gather together.
But not all residents see it the same way. The zoning update, passed by a council vote of 6-1 in February, has sparked opposition. Sarah Smith is a resident who began a signature drive aiming to bring the plan to voters in a referendum, and said she's worried about how commercial development in neighborhoods and denser housing options could negatively affect the city's single-family neighborhoods.
My house is small, 1,200 square feet, and they're now saying my street is going to be zoned where they can put a 50-unit apartment complex directly across the street from me. And I don't think that's fair to the homeowners who have chosen their neighborhood for a specific reason. They want certain characteristics, they want a certain way of life.
Smith said she feels that such a drastic change to the city's code should be put to a vote in November.
There was a public meeting here at the city, and they acknowledged they've never actually done a comprehensive cost analysis to see if the new requirements are going to increase housing costs. This type of thing, a city council should not be deciding. They should be putting this on the ballot from the start, because it's something that's going to affect everybody in the city.
But some city officials, including the city's development director Chris Favor, say that the city did its due diligence in bringing in stakeholders during the process of adopting the new zoning code, which is not only simpler, but is also designed to help the city deal with its current housing shortage of an estimated 5,000 units.
A lot of these changes will make it easier for developers to add these, what's called the missing middle, right? So maybe it's a duplex, maybe it's a quadplex, maybe it is a small apartment complex. Right now, a lot of that has to be done with special use permits, which is time and money to any developer. The quicker you can help a developer bring a new house to market, the more affordable that can make that home.
Additionally, Favor said that while the building codes are being overhauled for the whole city, the biggest impact will be on the new developments.
It doesn't impact a lot of current developed neighborhoods. A lot of this was intended to help flexibility for future development, but there are some opportunities to enhance and provide some amenities that residents are looking for in their neighborhoods.
In terms of the petition to overturn the new code, it was submitted by Sarah Smith to Las Cruces City Clerk Christine Rivera in mid-April. Rivera explained that to be successful, the petition must have 3,240 signatures, which equals 15% of the total number of ballots cast at the two most recent city elections, as outlined by the city charter. Rivera said the originally submitted petition had roughly 2,500 signatures.
I did go through them and did submit a letter of insufficiency to her. So the next steps are she has 15 days from the day I mailed the letter to amend her petition process. And what that means is that she'll collect more signatures. And so then she'll get an additional 15 days to collect signatures on a supplementary petition and then submit those to me. At that point, I have 5 business days to go through those and then determine if the entire petition itself is sufficient or not. My role, again, is to be neutral and follow the rules and regulations per state statute and city charter and make sure that those are followed correctly.
As it currently stands, Sarah Smith said that she has since collected 2,000 more signatures and resubmitted the petition to the city clerk in early May, and according to the city clerk, as of May 7th, the petition is currently under review and will be taken to the city council once that review is complete. For KRWG Public Media, I'm Johnny Coker.
Thank you so much for joining us. For more local news, feel free to check out our website at krwg.org to stay updated. I'm Noah Raess, and we will see you next time on Newsmakers.